when you guys are in class, okay, your job is to, again, annotate those notes and work really, really hard at making sure that all those annotations are getting there the way that you want them. Now, also in class, if you will do me a favor on your computers and go to our day by day. So again, go to your day by day. Okay, so it looks like this. Okay, hey guys, listen. When you are in your day by day, first off, Chase, did you get into, is our class on there? Oh, look at that. Okay, so that daily writing practice is something we do at the start of every class. So you'll have to make that up if you didn't get it done today. Okay, all right, so here's what you do next. Now, options for you. A lot of students like to press this PowerPoint and like to have up the PowerPoint with me as I present. A lot of students prefer that. So if you want to do that, oh look, see we got 3 followers, okay? So if you want to do that, that would be great. Another option too is we have a lot of people who prefer to type their notes. If you prefer to type, and also I did have a question on the survey in this class that somebody said, can I use my own device? The answer is yes, except for phones. The reason why is because 9 times out of 10, it is definitely not being used for notes, okay? If you wanted to, I'll show you how to be able to access the notes. So if you click on the link, and then up at the top, you kind of do like this thing, and then the Google Docs will show up. Okay, and that's how you can be able to access them. Then what you're going to do is you press File, make a copy, you create a new copy onto your Google Drive, and then you're good to go. The other thing that you're going to do is if you will go ahead, and if you don't pick this up, you know to do this automatically. If you see where it says homework and in-class assignment, go ahead and click that. And we will talk about these directions later because due to time, I had to kind of adjust some things. Go ahead and press link. And in theory, I should have 37 people with me in just a second. So again, press link. And this will come up. Now what you're going to do is you are going to make an editable copy so that you can be able to edit this document. Because we're going to be doing this. This is part of it's going to be here at school. Some of it's going to be homework. If you go ahead and press File, go ahead and do this with me so you're not like, I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, press File, make a copy, then press Enter. Some people like to rename it. That's up to you. You will now notice that you can now fully edit this document. Whenever you make edits, switch the font and type. The reason why is because I grade these on my cell phone 95% of the time because I'm doing it when I'm like doing something with the baby or something like that. And I can see it easier when you change the font. It helps me grade a lot faster. So change the font color to whatever you need to be. You can go ahead and edit your name and your date and your period and different things like that. You can choose any color as long as I can see it. So I always hear that one sassy kid that's like, I chose white. Okay, well that doesn't help me. All right, so choose something that I can read. And then we're going to do this assignment in a little bit. When you go to submit assignments, you have to download them to submit it, which you'll have a submit button up here. The reason why is because I do VeriCite, which is a plagiarism checker. So if it's like the day that something's due and you're like, hey, just send me that doc, well, it's going to come up as plagiarized. So that's why that's there. Okay? So we will do this in a little bit, so you can kind of just put this to the side. If you would like to follow along with the PowerPoint, then awesome. If you would like to not, then that's cool too. It's whatever you feel like. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to get started today. So your guys' writing practice today asked you to answer the question, when does America's history start? And that question is all over the place. It really depends on your personal beliefs or whatever. So we have some people that say America's history starts when whoever, whatever created the earth. So whatever your personal beliefs is, when the earth was created, that's when America's history started. Some people say that America's history starts when the very first people walk across the Bering Land Bridge and come into the Americas. About 80% though of students say, and I did this number off of A Day's classes and 1B, okay? 80% of students say that America's history starts in 1492. What happens in 1492?
Columbus
Columbus sails the ocean blue. Yes.
Where Columbus discovers the Caribbean.
Yes. Which then leads to the rest of the Americas. Yes. So we say that Columbus discovers, and we'll talk about that later. America, right? Other people say that America's history starts in 1607. Anybody know what happened in 1607? Jamestown. Yep. First English colonization of the Americas. Then we have a smaller group that says America's history starts after the Revolutionary War, which is when we're actually a country. And there's actually been a new wave, and this has happened in a lot of current events, which we'll talk about with the American Revolution. A new wave has begun to say that America's history doesn't start until after the Civil War. And that's because after the Civil War, slavery is abolished, and that's when the true American history happens. So it's very much dependent. We will talk about that because a huge current event happened over the summer regarding that exact issue. And we'll talk about that when we get to the American Revolution. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through this. So again, have your highlighters out, have your pens out, however this works for you to make sure that you know what I'm going to teach you, okay? Now, in APUSH and in all the histories, so for those of you who only took human geography last year, you won't know this, but if you took histories, then great. All history classes are separated into periods, okay? Periods are general, like splits in between time periods, and then those periods represent some sort of a theme. Maybe it's the Civil War, the American Revolution, whatever it could possibly be. In APUSH, period 1 is from 10,000 BC to 1607, which means in one class period and a quarter, because we're going to start next class period on it, we're going to learn about 11,000 years of history, okay? Now, the good news is, if you want to put at the top, so at the top of this paper, I would put period 1, because it's your entire packet for all of period 1. Then next to that, you can do a little arrow, and you can put 5% of the exam. According to the College Board, who, to be honest with you, does their own thing, so who the heck knows what they're going to do, but in theory, only 5% of the exam is going to be on period 1. Although last year they had 9 of 55 questions on it, so whatever, College Board, okay? But what that means is, if we look at another period, such as period 7 is 18% of the exam. Which one, if you get to the end of the school year and you're like, I don't even know what the word America means, okay? Which one are you more likely going to study? Period 7, okay? And the reason why is because period 1 is such a small percentage of the test. Yes?
Are there 10 periods then?
There are 9 periods. What?
The 10th divider?
Well, the thing is that most packs don't come in 9. Yeah. You do need 9 sections of your binder so you can be able to put things in it based on the periods. But there are only 9 periods in APUSH. I know that in AP World I think it's like 6, so it's a little bit smaller. Did you have a question?
No, I was just high-fiving him because we took AP Euro last year.
Oh, cool. That's definitely a high-five moment. This year, the vast majority of the AP Euro kids are 9th graders.
Yep.
It's a huge amount. It's changing. It used to be only 10th graders took that, or like 12th graders would take that class. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to learn all of period 1, mostly today and a little bit next class. Our goal is to get through and do about a third of your homework in class, and then the rest will be at home. That's our goal today, okay? All right, so as we go ahead and get started, so again, this will be up at the same exact time. We're going to go ahead and get started on the period 1. Now, we're going to go back to 10,000 BC, okay? In 10,000 BC, we are in the middle of an ice age, and during this ice age, a lot of our people are dependent on food. That is what everybody is dependent on. It is not some society where you're sitting there thinking, I wonder about the anatomy of the mammoth, and they don't do that. You know what the anatomy of the mammoth is? Food. What's the best food? Food. That's what your world revolves around. You know that like dog that you have and all that he cares about is food? And like you could be loving him and all he cares about is like the chip on the floor? Okay? That's what this life's like, is food. So because of that, they are going to move. So next to that very first turn, if you want to put the reasons for that movement, the 2 reasons are, number 1, hunters following their prey. And then number 2 is following fish from Alaska. If you also want to bracket those 2, and you want to put the word necessity, you have to move. If your food source moves, you have no choice. You must move. And that's why they are going to begin to move across into the Americas. Now, When they begin to move across, they are going to move across what? Where are they going to move across? Yeah.
The divider. Sorry, not
Yep.
the divider. The bridge between Russia and Alaska.
Yep. And what's the bridge called? Anybody know? The Bering Land Bridge. That's right. And that is on your notes. Go ahead and highlight that for me. There are certain terms you need to know for period 1. That is going to be one of the big ones. Okay? So what's going to happen is you're going to have this mass migration across the Bering Land Bridge. Now I want to show you something really interesting about this map. Okay? I want you to look at this map. Just look at what it looks like. And then I want you to compare it to the map behind you on this wall over here. What is different about those two maps?
It's just not there.
What?
Is the bridge not there?
No, the bridge is there. Well, technically not this time because it's an ice bridge. Yeah.
Is it that America isn't in the center?
Exactly. In this map, America's the center of the universe. What does that do to Asia, in particular Russia and China? It cuts them in half because you have to go to the other side in order to be able to get there. Okay, this map over here doesn't have America in the center. This is a fun fact about maps. 85% of maps in the United States have America in the center. All right? 95% of the other maps in the world don't have America in the center because then you don't cut anything off. So if you want to know a fun fact, we really like ourselves because we put ourselves in the center of the universe. Okay? So anyways, we're going to move across the Bering Land Bridge and across the Bering Strait to be able to get over into the Americas. Now, the very first people in the Americas are going to be what is known as the Clovis people. So the Clovis people are going to be those first Americans that are peoples. Now, when they come across, they come down into, in particular, the Rocky Mountains along the shoreline. Why would they go along the shoreline of Canada? Fish. Yeah, you follow the fish, right? Makes sense. And you come down into the Americas, and they're going to end up in the Rocky Mountain area and continue to go south and then later east and west. Why would it be more likely that they would go south first, such as in the Aztecs and the Incans, rather than going east? Well, one said warm, one said it's cold. Yeah, exactly. It's the temperature, right? If you've seen New York in winter, it's cold. It is several feet deep. They sometimes get more snow than us. So you're going to go south because that's where the equator is at and you want to be able to have warmth. That's why they go into South America. Okay? Now, why are they called the Clovis people? Well, that's because they were found in Clovis, New Mexico. So what happens is in Clovis, New Mexico in 1929, they are doing an excavation, and during that excavation, they discover a whole bunch of spearheads that were 5,000 years older than the closest item in the Americas. And because of that, they named them the Clovis people. It's not like the Clovis people were like, oh, we should be called Clovis. No, it's because they were found in Clovis, New Mexico. So they are considered the oldest person, or people in America. Or are they? Oh, hey, second time today. Except now it's something else. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sophia.
Me? Nathan?
Yeah.
Alright.
Cool. You got 2, so you got a while.
Yeah.
All right? So, controversy over this whole idea of having the first Americans. So what happens is about 10 years ago, they are doing an excavation, an archaeological dig in California. While they're doing the dig, they find 2 things. The first, they find spears, but these are not normal spears because they are not made out of either an iron or a bronze or stone. They are made out of shell, and they are made out of precious gem. Then, as they continue to excavate, they find this wood, and the wood, which they believe was from an oar or a paddle. What does that possibly imply about how the first Americans may have come, especially because these were dated almost 2,000 years prior to the Clovis people? Where do you think those people might have come from? Somebody said Japan. Good. Yeah, Japan and Asia and things like that, which means how did they come over here? By boat. So now the idea is maybe it wasn't the Bering Land Bridge. Maybe instead of that, they believe they might have come over, especially from Japan, based on records that were kept in Japan talking about voyages, may have come over by canoe or possibly by some sort of a boat across. Now, an interesting thing about Columbus versus Japan, when you're going across the ocean, In the Atlantic, there's this there's this divide, right, in the sea because of the different ways the plates are. Because of that, the current system drives you downwards. So while Columbus starts like here, and he ends up all the way down here because of currents, because of the current system in the Pacific, it goes around in a circle. So what would happen is, that's why if there's an earthquake here, the tsunami can end up that way, is because of the current system, is that it is possible for them to have gone from Japan, tried to go straight across, and only missed by a little bit and end up in Seattle or California. Now, one thing about this is Google decided that this was kind of cool, and they decided to make like a little fun thing for people. So if you go on Google Maps and you put in Portland or Seattle, and you put in Tokyo, Japan, it'll give you the directions of how to go by canoe. Takes about 4 years, but in theory, you could make it by Google Maps and go over. So let's talk about what happens prior to European contact. This section is very, very important. Star it, know it. In APUSH and in all the AP classes, we have what is known as a key concept. A key concept is the 190th things that the AP College Board says you need to teach the kids this. These are 3 of them, which means, is it very likely to be on the AP exam? Yes. So let's go over really quickly things that are must-knows. So in this very first bullet, if you will go ahead and highlight the word nomadic. Now, nomadic is slightly different than a hunter-gatherer. In a nomadic society, you still hunt and gather, but if you, let's say that your food source is here, you are willing to bed down, or let's say that it's winter, and so you decide to go more south simply because it's warmer, that's a nomadic, although it is still very much a hunter-gatherer society. Then if you will also highlight hunter and gatherers, and then highlight dependent on the climate. Your world controlled what you did. Okay? Then the second bullet is the most important bullet. Star it. Know it. Say, this is more than likely going to be on the AP exam. Okay? So if you will go ahead and highlight the word maize and star the word maize, it's extremely, extremely important. Okay? Then if you will also highlight Mexico and the American Southwest, and we're going to talk about this a lot more in a second, but I'm just big things having you highlight. And then if you will highlight settled societies, and then circle irrigation. And this is a very, very important key concept that is talked about all the time on the AP exam. And then the third bullet, if you'll just highlight the word spirituality. And we'll talk about that later. Okay? Now, when you look at a map of the United States with Native Americans, you will notice that they are clumped into areas. Now, these areas tend to define how those people live. However, that doesn't mean that they necessarily interacted. So, for example, the Anasazi may not have been that aware that there was another people that were very similar to them, known as the Navajo, living not that far away from them. They lived in their own little communities. They did not venture. So while they lived similarly, they didn't necessarily interact as much, except for mostly with trade. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the 4 major sections of Native American tribes prior to Columbus. Now, if I were you, I would take your paper and I would turn it to the side. Okay? You know where our notes are, right? You don't have to have them out. It's just, I'm just letting you know. It might be easier. Okay?
Okay.
Do you know where they're at?
No.
Okay, so as you come in, there's a packet over there. So as you turn it to the side, you will see that you have like a chart on the first page. On the side of that chart, I want you to write the word compare. Compare. On the side of your first page chart. And compare is a fancy word for what? What is a synonym for the word compare? Yeah. Exactly, similar. So those are our similarities. So if you will do compare and then in parentheses write the word similarities. And contrast. If compare to similarities, what does that mean contrast is going to be looking at? Differences. So what that means is you guys need to be able to compare and find the similarities and the differences, contrast these different native tribes. Now, on the AP exam, one of your SAQs, which an SAQ is a short answer question, we'll go over those in a couple of days. one of your essays is all about comparison, comparing two things. And traditionally, those are the lowest scoring because people don't understand how am I supposed to find similarities and differences. So try to find those as we continue on. Okay? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of these different sections. So the first section is the Southwest tribes. Please star this section. The two most important of the 5 sections on this paper are the Southwest and the Eastern tribes. The Southwest and the Eastern tribes. In particular, well, both of them are very, very important for 2 different reasons. Okay? So, things that I would highlight on this Southwest tribe, if you will go ahead and highlight maize cultivation. Maize cultivation. And then go ahead and highlight from supported all the way down to societies. And we'll talk about maize in just a second. So again, supported all the way down to societies. Okay? So let's talk about maize. You've probably heard of it. Okay? So maize, and again, a little bit of controversy because it all depends on who you talk to, but for all intents and purposes, maize is a type of corn. Okay? Now, there's a lot of controversy over that statement, but for our intents and purposes, it's a type of corn. Anybody know in the United States, let's talk about crop production in the United States. So, obviously, we grow a lot of crops. We're a huge agricultural basis. However, let's talk about potatoes. So, potatoes just happen to be my favorite food. I love mashed potatoes. Okay? So, with potatoes, does anybody know about how many potato varieties we sell in the United States? Just start shouting out numbers.
200.
Wow, you guys are really high. Everybody else is like 1. Okay? It's about 6 to 8. So if you go to a supermarket, and some of you are like, shoot, I overshot it by 300. Okay? So here in the United States, the average supermarket only sells about 6 to 8 types of potatoes. Anybody know what the 90% of Americans only eat one type of potato?
It's just like your basic potato. It's like
Well, it has a name.
a russet.
It's a russet potato, which is a fancy word for what? What's the basic term? It's like a nickname. It's the Idaho potato. Okay? So, the Idaho potato is about 90% of Americans. What you eat when you eat a potato, like potato chips, those are all russet potatoes. We also have things like the purple potatoes. We have red potatoes. We have yellow potatoes, otherwise known as golden potatoes. Lots of potatoes. Trust me, I'm from Idaho. I know potatoes. Okay? Okay, French fries is not a type of potato, though.
But it's so good.
Okay, curly fries is also not a type of potato. All right, now I want you to think of corn. Or before we talk about corn, let's talk about potatoes. Okay? If you were to go down to Mexico and you were to go to a market, does anybody know about how many types of potatoes you would find at a Mexican market?
Over 500.
A little bit lower than 100, not over 500, that's a lot. It's about 110 types of potatoes. Okay? Now, why is it that Mexico sells so many different types of potatoes and not America? Well, in America, we've created as a factory system almost, right? If 90% of Americans want russet potatoes, why would we have any other potato to grow? Would it make economic sense? And so we only have a small amount of items. It's the same thing with phones. We only have like 3 or 4 major brands of cell phones, whereas if you go to Europe, there's like 25 other phone types. But we don't have them in America because we mass produce things. So let's talk about corn. Here in the United States, how many types of corn do we have and sell? 3. 3 is the magic number. Okay? We typically only sell 3 types of corn. We sell typical yellow corn, we have sweet corn, and we have white corn. That's pretty much it. Okay? How about Mexico? Now you guys are like, oh, I know this one. It's actually about 40 to 60 types of corn. So again, lots of diversity. Now, maize is a type of corn. If you go to the really deep Southwest, you might be able to find it. We don't sell a lot of it in the United States because it is extremely bland. Okay, it doesn't have a lot of taste to it. But down in Mexico, maize is actually more popular than our traditional yellow corn. And a lot of that's cultural. So with maize, the important thing about it too is 2 things. If you want to put this next to maize, okay, 1 is it provides more nutrients than the average corn. And I'm not saying like fancy nutrients. The important thing about this is it actually has a protein inside of that maize that allows you that if, let's say that you go several weeks without a kill, you can be able to survive off of that protein. But number 2, and this is the most important, it is drought resistant. Drought resistant. Why would that be important in the American Southwest?
It's dry.
It's dry. It's a desert. Okay? And you need something that can be able to survive the droughts. So with maize cultivation, the American Southwest tribes begin to cultivate maize. There's a big problem though. What can't you be if you are cultivating crops as a community? What can't you do? You can't hunt. Well, you can hunt. You can't move, right? Can you imagine some guy that's like moving and he like takes a shovel and like picks up his corn plant and like carries his corn to the next spot and plants it, right? That's not how that works. So what do you think has to happen if maize happens? Permanent settlement. And that's what you need to put. The big effect of maize is permanent settlement in the American Southwest. Very, very important, must-know information, highlighted, star it. You got to know the effect of maize. Permanent settlements. Now, as we go to the American Southwest, there are a couple of tribes that you need to know. If you'll go ahead and highlight the name Anasazi. Anasazi. Those are the ancient ones. Now, the Anasazi are easily the most successful of all the American Southwest tribes. Now, the Anasazi as well, their main city, their capital, was a place called Chaco Canyon. Anybody ever been to Chaco Canyon? Woo, we got 1, 2. Yay, couple people. Also, if you've ever had Chacos, that's what they're named after, okay? So, with Chaco Canyon is going to be the capital, but here's some really unique facts about Chaco Canyon. So, Chaco Canyon, first off, if you will put next to the American Southwest the word Pueblo, Pueblo, Pueblo. Okay? So the Pueblo is a type of house. Basically, you don't have any trees or anything like that to build a regular house with. So instead, with the Pueblos, you're going to create it out of mud and dirt and different things like that. Now, with these Pueblos, they're going to create these complexes. So imagine this entire thing as a giant apartment complex. But in that apartment complex, you also have stores and grocery stores and churches and things like that. And all this is one building. It's like, you know how Inception is like a dream within a dream? Imagine a building within a building within a building. That's basically what this is. And there's a better picture coming up in just a second. An important thing about Chaco Canyon that you'll notice too is these things called kivas. And kivas are all the circles. So if you notice this is a sky view, all of these are kivas. The kivas is actually the religious center. It's basically like a church building. Now, if you know anything about churches during this time period, who was allowed to go to the temple to worship? Who can go? Typically the rich, the powerful. What gender? Male. And can all males in the church go? No. Typically the priests, the higher-ups, and typically speaking people who speak Latin. The kivas are different. Everybody is allowed to worship in a kivas. The only exception is the large city kivas that is specifically for the priests, mostly because they bury their leaders there. But in general, it's a very open environment. Now, if you look at another example of an Anasazi settlement, I want you to look at this picture and then compare it to this picture. Do you guys know how they're basically the same? So when we talk about over in Europe, they say, oh, well, those savages, they don't have society. They don't have technology. They are just this native population just waiting for civilization. Those two areas are 1,000 miles apart. And yet, they were able to make something that looks almost exactly the same. Now, by the way, Chaco Canyon was also known as the world's largest apartment building until New York City was built. At its height, that apartment building had 1,000 people living in it at one time. Now, what does it look like with the cities when it's built? Well, before we get there, let's talk about turquoise. If you'll go ahead and highlight turquoise. Raise your hand if you've ever been to either New Mexico or Arizona. Okay? What is in every single gift shop?
Turquoise.
Turquoise. Literally, you go, their license plates are turquoise. Okay? The reason why is because turquoise becomes an easily accessible commodity. And once it acquires that commodity, you're then able to trade it. The big thing you need to know about turquoise, if you want to put above it, is trade. Turquoise becomes the first major commodity traded amongst Native Americans, and it begins to spread throughout the United States. Basically, the turquoise is so cheap, it's easy to be able to produce and be able to market, and it goes across, and it becomes a really good asset source for them. So let's talk about these cities. This one should be more obvious. Where is this?
Mesa Verde.
The Mesa Verde. Okay? Mesa Verde is another example of an Anasazi Pueblo community, but it's very unique. Notice how this is underneath a cliff. This is about 1/8 of a mile tall. Then it has the city, and then it has 1/8 of a mile below that. Okay? Why would they do that? Why would they build themselves into a cliff at all? What do you think?
Shade.
Okay, yeah, so it could be shade and different things like that. Good. What do you think? Protection, right? Are people going to go and get their rock climbing gear and rappel down the side of this mountain to attack them? Okay, what else is going to happen when you're like rappelling downward, right? People are going to go and shoot at you, okay? Also, it allows you to be able to be very protected. So while people could leave, there was like a special way to get out. Nobody did. So I want you to imagine your entire lives, and this is the same thing with the apartment complex before. You live your entire life in this city. You do not leave. You stay there forever. Okay? Unless you're special and you're a hunter-gatherer or you're a farmer. Okay? Now, another thing about this, anybody ever seen WALL-E? Who's seen WALL-E? Such a good movie. It was totally on Disney Channel last weekend. Not that I was watching it. Okay? But WALL-E is a fantastic movie, but there's something really good about it. It's a great example for this. You guys know that big giant ship that everybody lives on? And how they never leave? That's what this is. You don't leave. Now, it's not like your mind's like, I wonder what's beyond the canyon. And this isn't Moana, okay? What we're talking about here is you stay there and that's your life. You stay in the canyon, okay? Now, if you want to give another example, here's another Anasazi city. What's different about this one? How are they protecting this one? It's on top of a freaking, plateau. This plateau is 1/2 mile tall, okay? Back then, there was no parking lot, okay? So you walked up the canyon. Now, if you go to this location, they actually do, something unique to have visitors come. Visitors don't get to go up the ramp. You get to go up the stairs, and it's 2,000 steps to the top. They didn't have the steps back then, except they did have a secret one to get back and forth. But they actually had their entire city at the top. They also had different farms and different things like that, and you lived here. So it's all one giant complex. Now, here's the problem with living there. Okay? What is New Mexico? It's a desert. Okay? It's dry. And although you have a drought-resistant plant, what does it need to survive? Water. So where are you going to get it? You're going to irrigate here like rivers. Well, the problem is with rivers in a desert, not going to work out. So you're going to get irrigation systems instead, and that's a really important part. They developed America's first irrigation system. So while you have over in Egypt, they're creating the first irrigation systems, we're creating the first over here. Now, this is in the Albuquerque, New Mexico airport. Just outside the airport, you can actually see these as you fly in, are all these little mounds, and they have a snake kind of a thing to it. Those mounds are the old irrigation system. So you can actually go and be able to see them of how they were able to provide water for their plants. Now, one other culture about this is the Navajo. The Navajo are mostly unique, and most importantly, if you'll go ahead and highlight, is language. They have the first written Native American language that we know of. That makes sense, that's translatable. Now, the Navajo language, though, is extremely hard to write down. You can see up on the board that is an example of Navajo. The thing about the Navajo language is right now it is a dying language. In case you don't know about Native American culture, reservation systems are really messed up. They're really, really bad. On the Navajo reservation, which there's about 7,000 residents of the Navajo reservation system, 1 in 3 are unemployed after the age of 18. If you compare that at the national average is 5.3% unemployment. Because of that unemployment, there's a massive rate of alcoholism, which leads to a huge rate of domestic violence and violence as a whole. And the big problem is people are leaving the reservation to go and find jobs. Why that's a problem? If you leave the reservation, you typically do not stay as connected to your culture. Right now in the Navajo Nation, there's only about 500 fluent Navajo speakers on the Navajo Nation, and only about 100 who can fluently write in Navajo. What that means is it's considered a dying language. That's why the U offers a minor in Navajo language studies, is because they want more people to get this so it does not die out. Right now, about 20 languages die per year, mostly in Africa, in very small villages. Because people aren't learning language anymore. You guys are like, I have technology and Google Translate. I don't need language. Okay? So let's talk about the greats. So the greats are going to be the ones that are going to be in either the Great Basin or the plains. On this, I would go ahead and highlight the word aridity. That's a very fancy word for dry. And highlight grasslands. And then if you will highlight mobile lifestyles. So there are two areas that we are talking about here. The first is going to be in the Great Plains. A great way to remember the Great Plains that some people like to write down is the word Tornado Alley. If you ever know about tornadoes, tornadoes love big flat land because they can go all over wherever they want. That's why that is Tornado Alley. It's always crazy. Unless apparently you live in Salt Lake. Because we had a tornado, even though it should not be possible, we had one anyways. We just barely had the 20-year anniversary of the Salt Lake City tornado about 2 weeks ago. Yes?
So it was that day, my mom was like, I remember this day. I was downtown, and it was like the weirdest thing had happened. I was like, what happened? Why? And it was just the funniest thing. She started talking about it, and I was like, but Utah can have things. I
Yeah.
Googled it, and it was real, because I didn't believe it.
Yeah, there's no reason we should have had a tornado. If you've seen videos of the tornado, the tornadoes are supposed to go top down. Ours went bottom up, and if you actually looked at the top of the tornado, there was a big blank where there was no cloud. It was like tornado, blank, and then clouds. It was a really weird thing. 3 people did die in it, and if you ask your parents who lived here, they know about this tornado. I was like in preschool when the tornado happened, but my family lived downtown in my mom's work building. We moved from Salt Lake City 2 months before the tornado, and my mom's building was destroyed, and that's where the people died at. So my mom's always like, it's a good thing we moved to Idaho. See, Idaho's a great state. But yeah, there's no reason we should have had a tornado, but we did. Anyways, so other than the Great Plains, we also have the Great Basin, which is where you guys live. Which is basically this giant basin where all these plateaus and things like that come together. What's the big Native American tribe in Utah? Are the Utes, right? And so when we talk about Utah, what is Utah in terms of their geography?
Desert.
It's a desert, right? Does it look like you can grow maize here? No, right? You would look like a silly person trying to put maize into the ground. So because of that, what do you have to do? How are you going to eat? If you can't grow crops. You move, and you're nomadic, and you're a hunter-gatherer, and you have to be mobile to follow the food. Anybody ever been to Arches? Yay! Way more than when we talked about Chocolate Canyon, right? Anybody raise your hand if you've been to Delicate Arch? Delicate Arch on the hike. Okay. You probably didn't even notice this sign, but as you walk up to Delicate Arch, there's a cute little sign that says, turn left for petroglyphs. And you know what nobody does? Turn left for the petroglyphs because they want to go up to Delicate Arch. Although they have a big problem right now that teenagers are going and destroying the petroglyphs at Arches. So they have a whole bunch of like barriers to keep you out. So I went over there and I went and took this picture at Arches. And one thing I want you to notice about this picture is, what are you noticing about the lifestyle? What are they trying to show about the lifestyle of the Utes?
They're riding the animals.
They are riding animals. What animal are they likely riding? A horse, which is how we know it's after the Spaniards came, because Spaniards bring horses. Anybody have a guess? These are actually 2 different types of animals. Anybody have guesses? One is a mountain goat. Antelope. Yep, antelope. Deer would be, deer can't survive in this environment. It'd be too big. And they eat grass. Okay, so that's kind of one of those examples of showing how they lived. Now, in terms of the East Coast, this is the second section you must know, so make sure you start this section. You need to know the Southwest tribes especially, and the East Coast tribes. So what you need to know about the East Coast is if you go ahead and highlight where it says mixed agricultural and that's supposed to say hunter-gatherer economies, and if you will highlight permanent villages. Who else has permanent settlements? The Southwest tribes. Could that be a similarity? Yes. Okay. So that's one of those things that you need to write down. If you're like, ooh, wait, that's a similarity. Write that down. Be like, hey, they're both that settlement kind of thing. You want to start trying to think what is similar and what are differences when we look at big charts like this of similarities and differences. Okay. So let's talk about the East Coast tribes. Now, first ones are going to be what's known as the mound builders. So if you go ahead and highlight the word mound builders, otherwise known as the Cahokia, that's the official name. All right, we're going to see if you guys are AP level or not, because if not, we might have to kick you out, okay? So, the mound builders, what do you think they built? Mounds. You guys are so smart. See, you guys can do AP. That's as easy as it gets, I'm sure, or as hard as it gets. So they built mounds. So, why did they build mounds? Now, I want you to think of what you've learned about societies in the past, okay? What is most likely going to be the center of every community at this time? Okay. Okay. Let's go with the church idea, okay? What is at the center of most communities at this time? Religion, okay? And that's what the purpose of these mounds were. The mounds were the massive temples, okay? They are where the priest goes to be able to communicate. Now, as you know about temples, and if you know anything about religion, temples are typically put on hilltops. Churches are typically put on hilltops. What are they trying to get closer to? God, okay? They are trying to get through God or whatever you see as your religion. So, they attempt to go up as high as they can in an attempt to get closer and closer to God. Now, this picture also has two other interesting things about it. So this is the Cahokia. This is going to be in the Mississippi River Valley. So what is this? The Mississippi River, okay? And let's see if anybody gets this. We have not yet gotten it today, okay? There's also something unique about this. You can see this right here.
It's a clock.
Not a clock, okay? It's not a sundial. It's actually a sport that was invented by the Mississippi tribes.
Tetherball.
No, it's not tetherball.
Volleyball?
It's like a weird basketball.
It is lacrosse. Good guess, everybody. Some of you are like, it's lacrosse. It's lacrosse. I know it. Yeah, you said that after I said it. Okay, so it is lacrosse. The Mississippi River tribes were one of the first communities to create lacrosse, and then it spread throughout the United States. As it spread southward into the Aztec tribes who made it into the lacrosse you know today, lacrosse was a lot more serious. Anybody play lacrosse? Okay, cool. Yeah, so you guys are my people that should know all this history, right? As you know about lacrosse, or maybe you don't know about lacrosse, the winners of lacrosse actually were sacrificed in the Aztec tribes. Yeah, so, yeah, exactly. You want to win, right? It was a great honor to be sacrificed. However, once you won, you might get a little bit of cold feet because you're like, oh, shoot, I'm going to die now. Should have played worse. But don't worry, because that's actually why hot chocolate was invented. Hot chocolate was originally invented by the Aztecs as a calming technique for people about to be sacrificed. It was called warrior chocolate. So they would take hot peppers and they would melt it into the chocolate and they would give you a hot chocolate drink to drink before you were sacrificed and it cooled you down. The good news is I have heard that they have changed the rules today. You do not have to be sacrificed when you win a lacrosse game. But you can still go to South America and Central America. You can get the chocolate. You can eat the warrior chocolate, but don't get sacrificed. That's bad. All right, so anyways, let's talk about the Iroquois. Now, the Iroquois, if you will go ahead and you will highlight this term. So the Iroquois, if you will also star this one, are the most likely, other than the Anasazi, that you're going to see in the AP exam. The reason why is because the Iroquois Confederacy we're going to learn about all the way up until the year 1800. So why is this important? Well, what happens is you go ahead and highlight alliance between 5 nations. Now, the Iroquois are also very important because they have those permanent settlements. That's where the longhouses come from. Why are longhouses able to be created? What are they created from? Trees and wood. And what does the East Coast have?
Grass.
They also have grass. Trees and wood. Now, the thing about these trees and wood, if you will put, by the way, while both the Aztecs, or not the Aztecs, the Anasazi and the Iroquois both have permanent settlements, they still have differences. So while they have permanent settlements, they also have the difference in that the reason why the Anasazi, why did they become permanent?
Because they were farming.
Farming what? Maize. Okay? Over in the Iroquois, they're able to have permanent settlements because of two reasons. You might want to write these down of why they're permanent settlements. Wood, access to wood, and water. Very easy to make a permanent settlement when you have those two things. So 5 nations in the Iroquois area are going to come together and they're going to decide that we are going to create this confederacy in order to stop so much hate. Why this happens is because really there's a lot of conflict, in particular over hunting grounds or different things that are happening. They're coming into conflict with each other. They live very close. So this guy is going to basically have a vision. And after that vision, he is going to create a document called the Great Law of Peace regarding why they need to come together. Now, if you will go ahead and flip back to your assignment, so the one that we made a copy for, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the first part of this assignment. So, if you pull up your copy of Pre-Colonization America, if you are having trouble seeing it, by the way, a great way to zoom in is if you press Control plus, it zooms in, or Control minus zooms out. Okay? So right now we are only doing questions 1 through 3 of the Iroquois Constitution. So 1, 2, 3. If I get to Columbus, should I do number 1? No. Stop after 3. Okay? To answer these questions, you are going to be reading the document on the second page. Okay? Now, at the end of the document, the second page, you'll see it has discussion questions. I always get, do I have to do those? No, not necessarily, because guess what? They're up at the top. So you don't have to do both because they're exactly the same. So what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and take about 5 to 7 minutes, read the document, and then answer questions 1, 2, and 3. Make sure that you change the font color so I can be able to see it, and stop when you get to Christopher Columbus. Okay, go ahead and get started. Yeah. Yeah, 1 second. by this point, you should have read the document and be started on your questions. Take about 2 more minutes. Bless you. One minute. Yeah, there's also an open one over there at the front. Okay, so as you guys go to read this, you'll notice some things are kind of continual throughout this document. And it kind of tells us a little bit more about what we can learn about Native American culture. So what are some things that are present throughout the document that you'll notice? Like some themes or some ways that they describe things. There's two really big ones. Yeah.
Like the tree.
Okay, so the tree. Do they talk about nature a lot in this? Yeah, what could that possibly imply about Native American tribes?
Spirituality.
Is spirituality is probably based on what? Nature, exactly, right? So the leaf falls and the roots do this, right? Also, when it talks about as the roots begin to spread and things like that, what is that? It's a type of English word. What are they using?
Well, I was just going to say that anything relating to the tree is also relating to peace. So
Yes.
The things from the tree spreading represents peace spreading across the 5 nations.
Good, which is very symbolic, which there's like fancy words for that in English. You've learned them? Metaphors and allegories, right? So we do realize that a lot of these things tend to be metaphors and allegories, partially because a lot of origin stories are like that. So if you've heard, like, for example, if you've ever seen the movie Brother Bear, or if you've seen things like like the Great Bear rises in the morning, which is how the sun rises, and as he goes to sleep, that's the sunset. All of those are allegories and metaphors and like imagery and different things like that. Now, another thing that was interesting about the Iroquois was also the impact of women. So most societies, what gender is in power? It is men. And yet, in the Iroquois, the women are the councilwomen. They are the ones that are going to be there to be able to lead that society. So that was very, very different compared to most other groups. Now, we will later talk about the Algonquians. The Algonquians become better known as the Powhatans, which is especially when that's because Powhatan becomes in power. Anybody know what they're also extremely famous for? Is Pocahontas, right? Aw, they're such a cute love story, right? Well, if you think about all the live actions they've been making lately with Disney, I can almost guarantee you they will not do Pocahontas. For two reasons. Number one, the first one was really, really not historically accurate. So it would be a whole different movie. They're trying to do that with Mulan right now and making it more historically accurate. And a bunch of people are saying they're not going to go see it, so I don't know what's going to happen with that. So it'd be really interesting. But additionally, I'm pretty sure the movie would be rated R.
What?
Because, well, it is so severe, the movie about Pocahontas, it's very graphic and very not school appropriate. So, yeah, it's not really appropriate for kids. So we'll see what happens. I heard that supposedly they were going to make Mulan possibly PG-13, but they backed off of that. Anyways, so we'll talk about Pocahontas later in the real story and things like that. So let's get to the West Coast. So along the West Coast, what is to the left of the West Coast? What is to the western side of the West Coast? It is the Pacific Ocean. And what is most likely your food source when you live next to the Pacific Ocean? Fish. And what happens with fish on a seasonal basis? They migrate, right? So what does that mean you have to do? Migrate, exactly. So if you go ahead and highlight ocean, and then highlight hunting and gathering. You have to move where the food moves. That's the rules. There's not a lot of migration on the East Coast because they don't need it. Fish don't really migrate as much on the East Coast because of how the current flows are. Whereas the West Coast, they definitely migrate north to south because they're getting all that Alaskan stuff in there. So you're highly unlikely, this is the least likely one that you're going to possibly see. But again, hunters-gatherers seek the ocean. Now, the Aztecs and the Incans, we're not going to talk about a ton because this is a U.S. history class and not a world and Euro class. So what that means is, while those were really important in world and stuff like that, not so important in U.S. history except when we talk about a little bit about the Spaniards, but you will not need to know that. If they throw that in there, then sorry, College Board does what College Board does, but you will probably not be able to know that. Just know Central South American. All right, so common trends. So these are all your similarities. So common similarities amongst everybody, these are generalizations. So the biggest similarities, again, we talked about nature. Everything is sacred. That's part of the reason why you use all parts of everything. So for example, if you go to like a Mexican food truck, right, those really cool taco trucks, right, and they're a real Mexican taco truck, not like a Taco Bell, okay? When you go to those, you will see on their list of meats, brain, tongue, ear. You will see all that because it is traditional in Native American societies, aka the Aztecs, to use every single part of the animal. So here in America, we're kind of wimps and we don't eat all parts. But like when I go down to Mexico, I see like eyeball and stomach and things like that. And it's completely normal because it's the spirituality of all parts of the animal. So other things that are important. Those origin stories, which we talked about before, the supernatural, very religious-based, community involvement. Again, hunting and gathering, the climate changes, obviously hunter-gatherer societies. Okay, inter-tribe relations, so how are people doing? Mostly it's trade, so make sure to highlight trade. Really a lot of this at this point is you trade with people. It's not so much fighting all the time. If you are to fight, there's a very specific reason for that fighting. You're not just fighting to fight. And different things like that. Every culture believes that they are the complete center of the universe, even though that they are probably not. But they believe that they are the only ones. Everybody else is part of them. They just don't realize so. So overall, what is the most important things to get from this whole thing? While Europe comes over and says these people are savages, they don't know what they're doing, they're whatever, that's not true. They were highly sophisticated cultures, as in they had a purpose, okay? And they lived in densely populated areas. So, for example, the capital of the Aztecs, which is Tenochtitlan, Tenochtitlan, which is Mexico City in today's world, that had a higher population at its height than France and England combined at the same exact time in history. So when we talk about these people having cultures, they had cultures, just nobody in Europe decided to care, okay? Why was the assumption that the continent was so sparsely populated, we think of everybody spread apart, is mostly because of one, that's about the space, and two, Europeans killed 90% of them. So it's really hard to tell how populated things are when you kill everybody. That's the reality. So now we're going to go into actual colonization. So if you will go ahead and do a line, above this section, this chapter 2, okay? Above is pre-1492, below is post-1492, aka European colonization. So what is happening at this time that causes colonization to occur? Okay, so let's talk about the Renaissance. So during the Renaissance, everything begins to change. Prior to the Renaissance, your world revolved around survival. Your goal was to survive past infancy and actually live. So the average girl gets married at 12. Why? She hits puberty. She's able to not have children. She needs to have as many kids as possible because she is dying at 30 years old. That's the average death rate in this time, which is the 1400s. 1 in 3 women die in childbirth. And the average woman gives birth to about 12 to 15 children because only half of them will live past 5 and only a quarter of those will live past 10. Your life does not revolve around love. You can't have love for your kids because if you love them and they die, well, you just got to move on, okay? Because your job is to survive. That's the reality of it. Kids starve because their parents are starving and have no milk for the baby. So when we talk about your society, it is miserable, right? It is awful, it is yucky, and everyone's dying. Also, the plague, right? Your friends are dying. Your population is plummeting. Everything is miserable. The Renaissance changes that because now people have intelligence and they are now able to think. Instead of saying, where's my next meal? Now it's saying, well, what if we thought about science? And what if we thought about how the world works? Okay? Things change when society changes. A great example of that is the plague, right? The plague kills everyone until some guy in England figures out, oh, we're all drinking from the same well. And there's rats next to the well. I wonder if the well has something to do with it. And then everybody forgot about it. And in the 1800s, it did the same thing with dysentery and realized, oh, wait, if people poop and it goes in the water source, we all get sick. And they were like, magic science, okay? That's what the Renaissance is. So now people begin to explore. The Portuguese are the first in Africa, and then it begins to expand. So why are they going? I'm going to actually skip to this one because this one's a little bit more clear. What are the 3 G's that everybody needs to know? What's the first one? Gold. Glory. God. If you're like, I have no idea what he's talking about, write down the 3 G's, okay? Why did they come? Number 1 is gold. Search for new sources of wealth. Number 2, economic and military competition. That's the glory. And if you say, wait a second, I thought they wanted individual glory. There is no internet. There is no becoming viral. There is nobody knows your name except for your country. Christopher Columbus isn't like, this is going to make me super famous. Maybe amongst smaller groups, but everybody at the time just knew Spain and Portugal. They didn't know Christopher Columbus, okay? And then 3, spreading Christianity. So he gets commissioned to go and fight a trade route to Asia. What country is he attempting to find? India. And where does he end up instead? The Caribbean. In particular, one more. He ends up in the Dominican Republic / Haiti. Depends on who you ask. They're both a similar island. He ends up arriving there, and he's like, oh my goodness, I found India. All these people are called Indians, even though they're not, because they're not Indian. Okay? So all these people are these Native Americans, and he gets real excited. And he gets really excited because he knows that he can be able to conquer these. In fact, we'll read a primary source next class where he basically is like, oh, I can subjugate all these people. Slavery. Now, one thing about this, though, as well, is he goes back and he tells a bunch of lies. In his diary, he says, like, all the roads are covered in gold. The buildings are gold. They eat out of spoons made of gold. He never actually saw gold. Okay? He traded gold. He never saw gold, and that's because there was no gold. Okay? And we'll talk about that next class. But before you guys go, I want to talk about your guys' homework assignment. So if you will pull up that document again, I'm going to tell you what you do and do not need to know. So, things that you need to do for your homework assignment. Okay? First off, you need to do part 2 of the first page. So, you are going to do the section that's about Christopher Columbus. Do you feel like 1492 is a good or a bad legacy? Is it positive or negative? Should we celebrate Columbus Day based on what you know? Now, listen. This is very important, or you're going to be like, I have to do a bunch of work. If you scroll down to the 3rd page, there's a section that says the 3 little pigs. We were supposed to get to that, but are not going to. So if you highlight that and go ahead, you can either strike it out. I just highlighted it with a black highlighter. Delete it, whatever you want to do to be able to make sure that it's not there. Okay? Then, as you continue to go down, we now have the interpretation. Spoiler alert, the Spaniards are going to subjugate, as in enslave, the natives. You're going to read one person thinks that's a good thing. One person thinks it's a bad thing. Down below, you explain their differences, who thinks what. What do you think that the person who says, yes, we should subjugate, how is that going to impact? And how do you think the other guy is going to be? Now listen, when you submit your assignment, you are going to download the assignment and submit on Canvas. I do have VeriCite up. So if you're like, I didn't do it, but good thing my friend did, send me the document, I'll submit the same one. It will come up as all plagiarized. Okay? Don't plagiarize in my class. All right? So you can log off. Let's put the computers away and plug them in, and then we'll see you next class.